What's up, guys? My name is Bree. Welcome to Church Online. If you'd like some more information on how to get involved here at New Life, check out the description below. But until then, it is time for worship. So stand up because we want to worship with you today.
The God who was, we worship the God who is, we worship the God who evermore will be. He opened the prison doors, he parted the raging sea. My God, he holds the victory. Yeah, there is joy in the house of the Lord, there is joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet, we're gonna shout out your praise. There is joy in the house of the Lord, our God is surely in this place. And we won't be quiet, we're gonna shout out your praise. Oh, 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 oh. We sing to the God who heals, we sing to the God who saves, we sing to the God who always makes a way. 'Cause he hung up on that cross and he rose up from the grave. My God, still rolling stones away. There's joy in the house of the Lord, there's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet, we're gonna shout out your praise. There is joy in the house of the Lord, our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet, we're gonna shout out your praise. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by his grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. Yes, we were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by his grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. There is joy in the house of the Lord, there is joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet, we're gonna shout out your praise. There is joy in the house of the Lord, our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet, we're gonna shout out your praise. There is joy in the house of the Lord, there is joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet, we're gonna shout out your praise. There is joy in the house of the Lord, our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet, we're gonna shout out your praise. Oh, 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 oh. We're gonna shout out your praise. Oh, 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 oh. Shout out your praise.
All right. If you've got your note sheet on your phone or mobile device, and if you have your Bible, I want you to turn to the book of Mark, chapter 9. Mark, chapter 9. Right in the beginning of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So find Mark, chapter 9. We've been in this series called Messy Faith, and today is actually the last day of this series. And we have looked at how our faith is imperfect because we are imperfect people. And so as we take this journey towards Jesus, sometimes it feels like we're 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Sometimes it feels like we're not making any progress at all. Sometimes it's just a millimeter at a time. But in the middle of the mess is where Jesus comes to meet us. He doesn't say, hey, get your life all figured out. fix yourself up, make sure you don't have any problems, and then you can come to me. Jesus meets us right there where we most desperately need him, and he invites us to come walk with him and to know him and to trust him. And so many times we look at the messiness of our faith, and all it does is bring shame and all those condemnation. And God's saying, listen, I know it's a mess, but I'm walking with you. And so it's kind of that we're not justifying it by any means, but we look around and go, we are all on this journey, and it's all a little messy sometimes. And God loves us right in the middle of it. So today, we're going to finish this up by looking at something that's kind of hard, okay? So I'm just going to tell you up front, it's going to be a little hard today. We're going to be looking at the mess of sin. And I know some of you are thinking, I knew we should have come next week and not this week, but so we're going to look at Jesus' words and how he addressed sin and the picture that he painted around it. And he has some difficult and challenging words for us. But I'm telling you, in the midst of the challenge of that is this freedom and healing that he wants to bring. So we can either run away from it and kind of bury our heads, or we can embrace it and say, what does God have for me in the midst of kind of this mess of sin in my life? Now, the struggle with that is that in our culture, sin and that word mostly finds itself centered around desserts, right? We don't think about like activity or moral things anymore. Oftentimes it's around desserts. In fact, I found a website called sinfuldesserts.com. And it's awesome, let me just say that. But in there I was looking at it, and P.F. Chang's, have any of you been to that restaurant? P.F. Chang's has a dessert called the Great Wall of Chocolate. It has over 1,700 calories per piece. Ready for this? 2 years ago, it was 2,200 calories. So they've really scaled back a lot. It's actually good for you now. 1,700 calories. And I was looking at it like, how do you burn off 1,700 calories? So I went to another site and found that one piece of that cake would take over 3 hours of running, or 4 hours of cycling, or nearly 8 hours of walking to burn off one piece of cake. And some of you are going, totally worth it, I'll do it without the walking, right? I mean, but it's like, that's what it is. And so we see those kinds of things, that's sinful, but here's the struggle. So often in our culture, lying isn't, and gossip isn't, racism isn't, and treating people with contempt isn't. The new measure for sin is about calories rather than our heart. And the idea most people have about sin is that it's probably something you shouldn't do. Or maybe it's just the repressive religious home that I was brought up in. So maybe it's all in my head. Maybe it's my background that's causing this. And so sin is often just seen as a throwaway issue. It's not really that big of a deal, unless it's the really, really bad stuff, like murder or rape or those kinds of things. And we think, well, those are bad. We can take the moral stand on those. But for the other stuff, we didn't just kind of dismiss it. And I know people don't talk about sin very much because it's uncomfortable and it's challenging for us. But if we're willing to dive into the messiness of faith, we can't do that and not look at this issue of sin. And I know that some of the messy faith we experience is through struggles and doubts and insecurities, and we've actually looked at some of those in this series. The imperfections of being human, right? We know some of the messiness comes from that, but sometimes the mess is caused by our own sin. And by the way, before we go too far down this road, as a pastor, I'm not coming from a perspective of me pointing at you saying you need to get this cleaned up. I'm not immune to this either. This is my story too. This is my journey as well. And I know it's a hard thing to look at since more and more of our culture wants to blame others or justify our actions, shift responsibility, or maybe just pretend that it's not really that bad and it's not really damaging us. But Jesus has some interesting words to tell us in the book of Mark. And before I read these words, I want us to understand something that's really important before we dive into them. That Jesus is going to speak some strong and I'll even say unsettling words. You're going to hear this and kind of go, wow, like, what is he saying? But you also need to know that Jesus isn't speaking these words in anger. He's not speaking these words in condemnation or in finger pointing. He's speaking them in this kind of real, authentic, no holds barred. It's like, this is what it really is. And he's trying to get his followers, his disciples, his friends really, to begin to see that it's not just, oh, that's no big deal, but the impact of this and the devastation that comes from that. Imagine if you were talking to a friend and you were telling them about, let's say a trail somewhere in the Sierras, and there's this part where it's really tricky, and if you don't watch your footing, you literally could slip off like off a cliff. You would want to make sure you're not angry with them, you're not mad at them, but you want them to understand the weight of this trail that they're on, understand the importance of watching your footing, right? We would want someone to really catch that. Well, Jesus is speaking in that same intense but embracing way to his disciples. So if you're there in Mark chapter 9, I'm going to start at verse 42. And again, tell you in advance, some of this is a little unsettling. Here's what Jesus says. But if you cause one of these little ones who trusts in me to fall into sin, it would be better for you to be thrown into the sea with a large millstone hung around your neck. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better to enter eternal life with only one hand than to go into the unquenchable fires of hell with two hands. If your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better to enter eternal life with only one foot than to be thrown into hell with 2 feet. And if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. It's better to enter the kingdom of God with only one eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into hell, where the maggots never die and the fire never goes out. That's kind of in quotes, so it was a known statement. Then Jesus says, for everyone will be tested with fire. Salt is good for seasoning, but if it loses its flavor, how do you make it salty again? You must have the qualities of salt among yourselves and live in peace with each other. Now, I'm going to get to this in just a little bit, but I want to just reassure you up front. Jesus is not advocating self-mutilation, okay? He's not actually advocating that we do this. There was a reason that he went to these extremes, and we're going to look at that in a moment. But before you just write it off and go, whoa, like Jesus is like off the deep end, he actually has a place that he's taking his followers and us, but it's not about self-mutilation. That was the trigger point to allow them to think a little bit differently. So let me tell you my goal for us today, and it comes really from Jesus' own heart. It's this, that we would come to hate sin. Not people who sin, because that's every single one of us. It's not about people, but that we would come to hate sin, and we would come to fear it and despise it, and hate it in a way that alcoholics hate what alcoholism does, hate it in a way that a victim of abuse hates violence, hate it in a way that a cancer patient hates cancer. Do we understand that? And not because we're super spiritual people who would never dream of stepping into those things, but because we come to see sin for what it really is and what it really does. That it's more than just messy, that it's destructive and damaging. Sometimes to us, even physically in our lives, but definitely every single time to our very souls. It distorts and disrupts us. And then in the process of this, we're going to begin to see that God loves us no matter what we've done or where we've been. And I know we've said that all through this series, that God doesn't ask us to get all cleaned up and spiritually perfect and then come to him, but he meets us in our mess. He meets us in the middle of our sin, and he invites us into something better. He invites us into something more, and that's his heart towards us. So I think we need a clearer picture of Jesus and the life that he brings. And I believe that when we come to see this life in the kingdom, this life in Jesus, and we recognize that it is good news, that it is actually the best news ever, and that we would be insane not to give up everything just to simply grab onto this life and hope that he offers. And when we come to that point, It won't be a matter of us following the rules. It won't be a matter of us making sure we have all the thou shalts and the thou shalts nots down. It will simply be our desire to know and to follow Jesus. So we need to understand, we need a clear view of what that looks like, what sin is and what it does in us. So write this down for number one. Jesus wants me to know life as it's supposed to be. Jesus wants me to understand what his intentions are, what his Father's intentions are, what God's ultimate plan was, and how sin has derailed that. So back quite a few years ago, there was a movie that came out called Grand Canyon, and I'm not necessarily advocating the movie or anything like that, but it's one of those movies where there's all these different threads of stories. It's like a huge cast, and these little stories kind of all end up weaving together at the end. But in this movie, the Grand Canyon, there's this guy, it's Kevin Kline. He's driving his car. He's going through inner city LA, and he has some car troubles, and so his car stalls. So he's on the side of the road, calls a tow truck to come, and while he's waiting for the tow truck, this gang starts seeing his car, seeing him in the car, and they start harassing him, and he's afraid for his life. While all this is going on, the tow truck comes, and the tow truck driver is Danny Glover. You guys know Danny Glover? So he comes there and he gets out and he's like, hey, what's going on here? And so he starts, getting the car towed up, and the gang keeps after him. They're saying, just leave him to us, leave him to us. So finally, Danny Glover pulls the leader of the gang to the side. And he gives this little speech, and this is the part that's stayed with me. He says, hey, this is not the way it's supposed to be. I should be able to do my job without asking your permission. And he should be able to wait for a tow and a car repair without fearing for his life. And he looks at this gang leader and he says, everything is supposed to be different than what it is here. This is not the way it's supposed to be. And it's just this powerful, poignant line. Now I want you to think over the past month, 6 months, 2 years, 5 years. Just kind of roll the clock back a little bit. Have you ever watched something on TV or on your phone? Have you ever looked at a news feed or social media and you see different things going on, whether it's locally, right here in our own communities, whether it's in our state or in our country or even in the world, and you look at things and go, what? This is not the way it's supposed to be. Some things just hit us and shock us, and we just think, what is going on? Everything is supposed to be different, and it's not. Why is everything so messed up? It's this. God intended one thing. He intended a way, and sin distorted that, and sin defiled that. So I want you to think for a moment with me about what the world would look like if it were the way it's supposed to be. If we could live in that place, how God intended things to be. Just think about it in a practical way. There would be no locks on your doors because no one would ever break in. You wouldn't actually need a key for your car. You could just have the button because nobody would steal anything. There would be no lie detectors because no one would need to shade the truth. There would be no lawsuits. There would be no prisons. If you had a friend who got promoted or got a new car or something, you would actually be happy for them rather than jealous and envious of them, right? It'd be a different place. The Giants would be on a win streak, But think about it. When you would go to sleep at night, imagine going to sleep with no regrets, nothing hidden, no shame, no knots in your stomach. Think for a moment about what social media would be. You'd see stories about friendship and encouragement and truth and laughter and joy. News feeds would be filled with stories of courage and honesty and beauty. And at the end of the day, we would share those stories and we would comment on them and we would encourage one another with them. Now, most of us in this room can't even imagine a world like that, right? We can't imagine living in culture where all of those things that distort and destroy would be pulled away, and instead it would only be truth and life and grace. I mean, we just can't even picture that. Now, in the Old Testament of the Bible, the prophets used to think about what that world would be like if it was lived in the way that we were created to live, if we lived under the rule and reign of God, if we walked in joy and in commitment to one another, as well as joy and commitment with the Father, and he would lead us that way. And so they would paint these pictures and they would use imagery about what that would look like. Some of you, if you've read through the Old Testament, when it would talk about going to Zion, that was this picture of how things could be and what they would be under the reign and rule of God. So I want to read you just a passage from the book of Isaiah. This is chapter 35, and I kind of used various passages to put it together. So if you read this in your Bible, it's going to have a little bit more in there. But I want you to catch the imagery of what Isaiah is trying to tell us. Here's what he says. Even the wilderness and desert will be glad in those days. The wasteland will rejoice and blossom. The deserts will become as green as the mountains of Lebanon. And there the Lord will display his glory, the splendor of our God. And with this news, strengthen those who have tired hands and encourage those who have weak knees. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong and don't fear, for your God is coming to save you. Springs will gush forth in the wilderness, and streams will water the wasteland. The parched ground will become a pool, and springs of water will satisfy the thirsty land. And a great road will go through that once deserted land, and it will be named the highway of holiness. See, the prophet is painting this picture, and it wasn't about trying to convey information. This isn't, this isn't just data type of a thing. He's creating this hunger and thirst, this little bit of a taste. It's like, oh, man, if I could live in that would be amazing. It's kind of like when King David wrote this. He said, taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, the joys of those who take refuge in him. And those who would read those words, whether they were in Old Testament times or us today, are stirred by them. And we think, I really do want what God offers. I want it more than I even knew I wanted it. Now, the word that was used to describe that in the Old Testament is a Jewish word, a Hebrew word that you're probably familiar with, and it's the word shalom. Shalom. Now, we often just simply translate that as peace, but it is so much more than peace. It's not just a lack of conflict. It's a word to describe what it would be like in this world if people lived in a place of commitment and peace and joy within themselves, with all of creation, with one another, and with God, and he would reign over us with justice and peace and love. And you think, well, that's kind of cool, Dave, but why are you telling us that? Because I don't know that we can understand what sin really does if we miss what God intends for us. That his intention for us is shalom in the very depths of our soul. A place where he rules and reigns, a place where we experience his grace and his kindness. That's what he desires for us. But when you contrast that with what sin does, with the mess of choosing my way and my desires and my wants and my needs over God's ways, my selfishness and hurt and insecurities and wounds distort and disfigure what God desires. So we have to see both sides of this. God's desire, his plan, his best, what his heart beats for. And when we begin to see and understand that, we begin to understand what this sin thing really does. Write this down for number 2. Jesus wants me to know the destruction that sin brings. So our series has been called Messy Faith, but can I tell you this? Sin is more than just messy. Though there's a messy component to it, right? It complicates and distorts God's best. But the truth is that sin at its very core is destructive. It ruins us. It damages us. And God isn't wagging his finger at us, and Jesus isn't condemning us with this pointed, you do this. That's not what this is about. This is about God's heart breaking, saying, I intended you for something more. Would you trust me in these next steps? But maybe just let me take a moment and give you some definitions of sin, because maybe we're We just think of it as 10 commandments or thou shalt not, and here's all these rules that we have to obey. But sin, as described in Scripture, is something much more. So one of the definitions of sin that came out of the King James was this idea that actually came from archers. So when they were doing these contests, they would draw back and release the arrow, and there was a target, like here was the target and then the bullseye, right? So if they missed the bullseye by just a little bit, or if they completely missed the target and the arrow just flew like yards and yards away, both of those were called a sin because they missed the target, they missed the bullseye. And so this picture of sin is when we miss God's best. By an inch or by a mile, we've missed it. So that's one picture of sin. The other definition is the choice that I make that defiles the way things are supposed to be. So God has this intention for me, for you, for how this works. And when I make the choice that goes against that, then I have walked into sin. The third is this breaking relationship with God and other people. And I think I like that definition because when we start thinking of that, it's not just a set of rules to be followed or to miss, but instead it's a relationship that God desires most of all. And when we break those relationships, we find ourselves in those damaged places. So when you think about the 10 commandments, not just as rules and regulations, but you think those first 5 commandments are about our relationship with God, right? Have no idols and no other God before me. And those things, he's talking about our vertical relationship. And then the other commandments are about our horizontal relationship with people. And when we break those, we're walking into damaged territory. C.S. Lewis wrote this about sin. Sin promises more and more and gives less and less until ultimately it promises everything and gives nothing. Think about that for a moment. What does sin promise? What is the temptation for? Security, pleasure, fulfillment, hope, control, power, a sense of self-worth. But what does it deliver? What does it actually deliver? And we've all stepped into that temptation. We've all thought, oh man, that'll get me this or this or this or whatever, and I just want it, and we step into that. But it didn't give us what we really wanted. It left us empty. We end up with false hope and fleeting pleasure. We wind up more insecure than before. Sin offers us the hint of what we're really after, but it gives us phony knockoffs that leave us hoping next time it might be different. And you and I both know it never is. It's never different the next time. We think, but this time, maybe it'll really give it to me. It doesn't. It promises more and more and gives us less and less. So now as Jesus comes to talk about sin, he is serious in this moment. And he talks about what happens when we cause someone else to stumble and sin. Look what he says in Mark 9:42. But if you cause one of these little ones who trusts in me to fall into sin, it would be better for you to be thrown into the sea with a large millstone hung around your neck. You see what he does here? He gives us this option. If you have the option of either causing someone, he says these little ones, kind of implicating kids or those who are more immature, if you cause someone to sin like that, and that's one of your options, and the other option is to put a millstone, you know what a millstone is, with a grind grain, big huge thing, around your neck and jump into the sea, he said, take that option. Now Jesus is not advocating suicide. He's not advocating self-destruction. But there's this thing where he's saying, do you realize how serious this is? Do you realize the damage that's done? He said, don't mistake this as no big deal. Don't just dismiss it and say, oh, well, maybe they should have known better. No. This is life and death. And what choice are we making? He says, be careful in this. Then in verse 43, he starts talking about our steps into sin. And so I want you to write this down for number 3. Sin is more than just my actions. Sin is more than just my actions. Now I want to illustrate this because otherwise I think we somehow miss what Jesus is doing in this passage. So I'm going to read you first just this little place in Matthew chapter 5, which is the Sermon on the Mount. And in this, Jesus begins to lay out something about how I think and how I see and how I feel and how I live and how that can sometimes contaminate and mess up my very soul. And so in Matthew chapter 5, he's talking about sexual sin here. He's talking about adultery and lust and all of that. And here's what he says. He says, you've heard that the law of Moses says, do not commit adultery. But I say anyone who even looks at a woman with lust in his eye has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So Jesus is doing some upside down teaching here. And you know that everyone who heard that went, whoa, wait a minute, time out. Because all the religious people who were hearing this would say, that's not me. I haven't done that. I haven't committed that act. I did exactly what Moses said. Do not commit adultery. And I've walked that line. And Jesus comes along and says, hang on a second. Yes, the action has consequences that are deep. Yes, the action brings about results in other people's lives that are damaging. But understand that all of that has started in you. All of that has started at a deeper place. See, this religious crowd didn't just hate sin, they hated certain sin. And they wanted to stay in kind of a moral superior place to go, at least I haven't done that, but they've done that, and they could point the finger and make the connections, right? There's those people and there's those people. And before you say, yeah, those religious people, those Pharisees, I hate those guys, understand that we're no different, right? We generally rate sin too, especially the sin in someone else. And Jesus' point here is not that lust has the same consequences as adultery, the physical act of it. His point is that if you think because you haven't done the physical act, you're free from what's breaking in your heart, that you can somehow look smugly at other people because you're so moral. Jesus says, hold on a second. We have to rewind that and dig deeper because there are issues, sin issues in you. There's a heart thing going on, and we have to get to the core. So that's where Jesus is taking us, that it's not just the physical, there's something deeper, a heart issue. So go back to Mark chapter 9. Jesus is taking this now, and he is saying, I'm going to take the religious elite, the Pharisees' example and their approach, and I'm going to take it out to the very end. So here's what he says. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. If your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. If your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out, right? He's saying, if it's all external, if it's just the acts of sin that are bad and bring a mess to our faith, well then, if it's your eye, gouge it out. Your hand, your foot, whatever it might be, then by all means, do that. Now, I want you just to put yourself in the disciples' shoes for a moment. They have never heard Jesus talk this way before. This is so out of sync and out of character. And they're sitting back going, what? Cut off your, Jesus, what are you saying? This is insane. How in the world does that work? And you can see them, kind of looking at their hand thinking, cut off my hand? What? And you can see Jesus not angry, not frustrated, not pointing the finger, but highlighting this, it's just the act thing. It's just the physical. And suddenly the disciples going, it's not my hand, is it? It's not my eye. It's not my foot. It's deeper than that, isn't it, Jesus? It's me. It's a heart thing, isn't it? And I can see maybe one of the disciples, I don't know, maybe one of them caught Jesus on the side and went, Jesus, this is serious, isn't it? And Jesus looking at this disciple, looking at you and me with such grace and love and saying, yeah, it is. It'll tear you apart. It'll ruin God's best for you. The invitation to be set free from sin is not just a call to avoid certain behaviors. It's an invitation to be transformed and renewed from the inside out. Write this down for the last one. Jesus invites me to come clean and to come home. His invitation is to face the truth about our sin. And Jesus is saying this is not a shame thing. This is a repentance thing. This is turning around from where I'm going and pursuing me. And he's saying, you are loved. You are absolutely loved. Jesus, if he was standing right here, if he could talk to you through a microphone, he would say, I gave up my life for you because I so desire for you to live in that place of shalom, in that place of peace, in that place of joy, completely remade and renewed in me. That's my desire for you. And sin will always ruin that. So the question is, are you ready to kind of draw a line in the sand or plant a flag or whatever metaphor you like, saying, you know what? No more justifying, no more avoiding, no more shifting blame. I'm going to be honest about my sin. I'm going to be honest about the damaging effects of that. And instead, I'm going to choose to come clean and choose Jesus. Now, I'm going to do it imperfectly. There are going to be times when I fail. There are going to be times when I sin. There are going to be times when I struggle. But Paul said this. He said, consider yourselves dead to sin and able to live for the glory of God through Christ Jesus. We have an opportunity to do that. This faith journey that we're on, the messy journey, it's going to be messy our entire lives, but we keep taking one step closer to Jesus. And it's going to take the Holy Spirit's help and strength to guide us. But I think for a lot of us in this room, we've just never made the declaration, I want to be done with sin. I want to choose his way rather than my way. We just kind of jump through the, at least I'm coming to church. And that's a really, really great thing. Don't get me wrong. But if it's just kind of the outward show, Jesus is saying, what about your heart? What are you going to do? John wrote, if we say we have no sin, we're only fooling ourselves and refusing to accept the truth. But here's the thing. If we confess our sins to him, he is faithful and just to forgive us and cleanse us, wash us clean from every wrong. So as we come to a close, we realize that the only way that any of this is possible is because of what Jesus did on the cross. And that's why I want you to get out this communion cup. And as we close today, we're going to remember his body that was broken for us, his blood that was shed for us, to wash us clean, to redeem us, to make us whole again in him. And I don't know where you're at today. I don't know what the wrestling and the struggling has been in your life. But can I tell you that God is for you and he's inviting you into something more. And it all begins at the cross. So on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he met with his followers and he took the Passover bread and he said, this is my body that's broken for you, for you. Let's eat and remember today. Then Jesus took the cup and he blessed it and said, this is the blood of a new covenant, a new promise and relationship between God and man, all made possible by the shedding of his blood. Let's drink together. Would you bow your heads? Lord, today we just want to say thank you for making a way for us, for going to the cross and taking the penalty of my sin and the sin of every single human being that's ever been and ever will be. You paid the price for those. And Jesus, in the midst of that, it just makes me think of the cost and the penalty of my sin. That you laid your life down, that you went through the agony of the cross on my behalf. And I'm grateful today. And so, Lord, I pray that for myself and for every single person in this room, every single person watching online, listening to a podcast, whatever it might be, that we would choose you today and your ways. That when we're faced with that temptation, God, would you, by your Holy Spirit, allow us to hit the pause button and consider, rather than just simply acting. That you would give us all that we need to just simply slow down in those moments. Recognize what sin does and how it destroys and distorts your best. And that in those moments, Lord, you would give us all we need in you and with you to choose your ways. God, thank you for your grace in every moment, even when we fail. Thanks for your forgiveness in every moment, even when we choose our way over your way. But Lord, I pray today would be a draw in the sand day, that we're choosing you no matter what. We love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. So a couple things. How can you and I not just hear challenging words today, but actually take the next step? So maybe this week, maybe you need to just find a moment. I don't know when you have a quiet moment. And maybe that's when you read a little bit of the Bible and maybe you pray, and that's a great thing. But I'm going to ask you sometime this week to just kind of get alone, have a moment where you stop, and you just simply come clean with God. This is what's been. This is what I've done. This is, Jesus, what I've tried to stay hidden and covered up. But the truth is, you already know, so I'm just going to bring it to the light. Maybe this week, you just simply come clean with God. And maybe this week, you just kind of put that marker in, saying, from this moment forward, I want your ways rather than my ways. And maybe you find a friend, a good friend, a soul friend to be accountable to, that you can share honestly with when you're struggling. Someone who will send you a text or call you up going, hey, are you okay? You can find that person and you can dive into some of the hard stuff. And in that, find the grace and the strength to take one step towards Jesus this week. Would you stand with me? Two things as you head out. One, if you're new here to New Life, maybe this is your first time, second time, we'd love a chance just to say hi. We have a gift for you in the middle of our lobby, a thing called Starting Point. Drop by there. We're not going to sign you up for anything, just a chance to say hi. So make sure you do that today. The second thing, go to that VBS table, get your kids signed up. You sign up. Let's make an impact in our kids' lives in this coming season. Hey, thanks for being here today. I'm praying for you. God bless. Have a great week.